Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to use an example here of a Penn Reels 104 to address a broader question. And the question is, how come my reel turns really tight? It's hard to turn. And what can I do about it? How can I go about servicing the reel? So you can see that this is a viewer's reel. It's Francesco's. And he sent it in to me for that reason, and he was a little bit shy about taking it apart. It's a reel that's probably 30 or 40 years old. His dad had bought it, and this reel has sat on the shelf for quite some time, as I understand. And he's asked me to go ahead and make it right. And while we're at it, we're going to switch the handle around here. But I thought I would show you as a bigger concern. If you get a reel like this it's tight, it just feels tired, it doesn't turn easily, what the causes are and how to go about fixing that. So we'll do that over the course of this video. So we're going to do a complete teardown on this. We're going to service it, and the answer to the question, without keeping anybody in much suspense, is one of two causes. There's either dried grease that's clogging the gears, or there's no grease that has evaporated over time, which is something that happens frequently. I'm going to take it apart. We're going to take the drag tensioner knob off and the spool. Then this little assembly here just pulls off, or should pull off. We've got a tight little washer here. And we don't need to take that off at the moment. We'll pull it up the other way. I'm just doing a disassembly. So the reel turns this way. Take the cap off to make sure that it's not screwed through. It's a screw on, not a screw through. So we're going to just back the handle off like this. The handles come in two flavors. They come in with a screw on it that screws into the main gear, or they come with a through screw. And they just need to be careful and know which one is which. Okay, with those aside then, we can remove the side plate screws. And this reel is in very nice shape. So it looks like it was purchased, it was used for a while, and then went on the shelf, and that's where either the grease dried or the grease evaporated. So just go ahead and take them out. Now if you found that these screws, as you were taking them out, were really tight or stubborn, don't try to over muscle them. Go ahead and grab some penetrating oil like a WD-40 or a liquid wrench or any of those types of products on the market, and go ahead and give it a shot and let it work its way in, because just like everything else with this reel, I'm just trying to find the right blade for that screwdriver. Over time, they kind of get set in their ways, if you will. And the last thing you want to do on one of these is snap them. So I'm just walking this out very carefully. It's coming. I know it's not going to tear off, but just be careful with them, especially with the older reels that you're working on. An ounce of prevention, if you will. Just spray it if you have any questions, and then you can work it off from there. Okay, so we've got a combination here. Most of it is dried grease from that opening there. We can see that there's some salt accumulation or something on the threads. That's why they were difficult to get out. I get a question all the time, should we lubricate those as we go through this? I don't think you'd need to lubricate them, but generally what I'll do, just hit them with a squirt of that penetrating oil so that it works its way through the salt. I also laid those three out on there to make sure that there were no different ones from particular pieces of the side plate. Sometimes there's a short screw in there, and if that is, you want to make sure that you know where that is. Okay, they just used a simple bushing setup. We're just going to take that and put that right back into the side case there. There's also some shims for the main gear. I'm going to leave that on there. I'm going to put that in my parts tray. My parts tray is simply the bottom of a milk jug. You can go fancy. You can get those metallic parts trays, or you can have other things, but I just simply use them, and when they get too greased up, I just go get another gallon of milk and get another parts tray. Okay, this is the lever that rides up and down on the shaft that causes the spool to go up and down. And we can see already that there's varnishing on this, that the grease is dried. And then as we go to take the balance out, we could pull that out, but I see that the bushing is coming with it. So let's remove the main axle. And when we do that, that'll give us the total clearance, and you'll see what we were working on the other side. So this uses kind of a loop and stud type of a cross wind to let that spool go up and down. It's a relatively unsophisticated method. It's not atypical at all of the design of the times. And yeah, I can just feel as I'm pulling through this that this whole reel is tight from dried grease, and you can just see it on the shaft, and more importantly, you're going to see it when I pull this off here. So just remember how these go. That's important. Take pictures along the way if you have any question whatsoever about how that was assembled, and that way you can go back at the end of it and reassemble it properly. Okay, so now we can pull this off, and you can see that this is what was holding it up in terms of me pulling it straight out before. And we can see all the dried and coagulated grease. So I get a lot of questions about how do I deal with dried grease, varnish, and so on. So let's talk about those for a moment here. So the easy way for me to do it then is I always have a flat-bladed small screwdriver here. Many of you see me use it for putting grease on. In this case, I'm going to use it to take it off. So as I mentioned, we got both causes here. We have dried grease and we have no grease. So if you're looking on the inside here, it's certainly dried and caked on here, and I'm using the side of it here as a scraper to kind of knock those chunks off. And then we have no grease. So you can check in the teeth on the main gear. There's no grease in there. I'm sure there's no grease up on the pinion gear, and that the bearings haven't been oiled in some time, and that's what's causing the sluggish performance here. Yeah, metal on metal never works really well. Metal with grease in between, it certainly does, and that's the intentions there. Alright, so the first part then I do is I scrape off the majority of that, and then I'll use a penetrating oil. In this case, it's just the house brand of Ace Hardware, but you can use WD-40, you can use liquid wrench, you can use any of those types of products. Here's another one. There's a Power Lube by CRC, and all of those will help you. But don't rely on that as your primary lubrication and oil of the reel itself. Just use that as a cleaning agent for now. So you can see how nicely that cleans it up. And we'll get it off that main shaft as well. And if you didn't scrape it, you could just kind of repeat the process until such time as it was cleaned the right way, or cleaned to your satisfaction. And if there was a lot of terrible buildup on it, you could use like a 4/0 steel wool. Don't go any more than that, and don't get aggressive with it, but if you just needed some additional help there, you could do that. Okay, so that main gear is clear. The next thing you want to do then is just check to make sure all of the teeth are in place, that they haven't been broken off. And you want to check two ways. You want to check it that way, and you want to check this way that there's no high and low spots in it. Otherwise it wouldn't work properly. And all of those are to be considered when a reel is running sluggish. You could have a warped main gear, and if that was the case, you'd have to replace it. This one's fine. Okay, and then there was some tarnish on this one, or varnish, either way. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit that with some penetrating oil. It's got a little kind of pooling in my work table here, and I'm just going to use this one. I'm going to use that steel wool for this because there is a light coat there, and you probably won't rub that off easily. And then I'll finish that with the paper towel. Okay, I'm going to put that in there, and then we can see that there was a lot of tarnish as I pulled up on the main shaft. So to do that, we're going to go underneath here because there's a ball bearing under there we want to get at anyway. I'm going to go grab the right wrench here. There we go. And now, most of the time, a wrench will come off, you know, the old righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. In this case, it does turn to the left to loosen it. If you test it and you find out that that nut is not moving, or it's hard to move, try it the other way. A lot of manufacturers will reverse the threading on that, that nut. Just make sure that you know which way it is. Underneath, we're pretty clean. This is the traditional anti-reverse. And then there's the stops below that. Because this thing hasn't been operated in a long time, I'm going to go ahead and take this whole piece off. So you'll see what's going on underneath here. You'll see how the assembly works. And more importantly, you'll learn the way to service this reel completely. So we have a little collared screw. This is the what I call the pinch anti-reverse. It's got 2 forks on it. It rides on that anti-reverse cam, and we'll show you the operation after I put it back together. We'll take that off and take that cam off then. It should come off. So, like everything else, I think it's a little stuck in the grease there into the parts tray. We can see accumulated grease underneath that's dried, which is why I wanted to get in there. Go ahead and scrape that off as well. And I'm wiping that grease onto a paper towel. I find the paper towels are the best. If you use like rags or things like that, typically what I find with those is that if you got any contaminants in there over time, they will transfer to something else, and that's kind of a bad idea. So I like to just dispose of it after I'm done with the work. Okay, here's a collar. One of the things I want to notice about the collar is it's not completely round. There is a flat spot, and the flat spot goes towards that anti-reverse piece. So I always like to make a note of that so that I reinstall properly. And one of the things I like to tell folks along the way is if you're unfamiliar with the reel, if you haven't worked on it much, and if you're in a situation where you've forgotten, you're kind of in trouble unless you take pictures along the way. So I encourage you. I'm obviously taking pictures along the way right now with my video, but you can use a standard cell phone. You could use a regular camera. Do whatever you like, but take pictures at the critical junctures, like maybe here where you're taking off a collar and a bearing, and just use that as your reference points. And if you get stuck, then you can go back and say, gee, okay, that was the sequence that I took that off in. Or maybe you don't get stuck and you feel like it's a waste of time. Trust me, it's never a waste of time. All right, there's some accumulated dried grease here. I'm just pulling that off. All right, so checking the main gear now. That main gear is good. There's a pile of dried grease below, and I think that probably was there from when I pulled the axle shaft up, and you can just feel it. This is like tar. Not a good thing. Okay, so that's taking care of that. We can use the blade of the screwdriver here to knock some of the grease on the bottom of the channel out, just to make sure you have a nice clear path for your main gear to spin. And again, I'm just transferring that to a paper towel, which we'll throw out later. But just make sure all of that is good. Check the teeth while you're doing this. They're all in good shape. And while I'm at it, before I reinstall, I'm just going to go ahead and put some grease right back in there. Now, you don't have to put it in every tooth. It's going to rotate and it's going to work just fine. All right, we have that bearing. Next thing to do then is kind of spin it, hold the inner core, spin it, make sure it's spinning easily. It's not spinning that easily because we know that it's been sitting for a long time. So I'm just going to flood that bearing with oil. In this case, I'm using Penn's Precision Reel Oil. There's others out there like Reel X and others on the market. Whatever you use, make sure that you use an oil that's designed for a fishing reel. They're not expensive. They're only a couple of dollars for those containers. They're available on Amazon and other places. Just go ahead and make sure that you buy the product for the fishing reel. Okay, the bearing goes on, and then that collar goes on. And before I go back and reinstall, I'm going to take a cotton swab and go on the inside just to make sure that if there was dried grease in there, that we've captured that. In this case, it's pretty clean. So go ahead and put that back into its setting. Get that collar. Remember what we said before about the flat side facing out. towards that anti-reverse. So I'll go ahead and go do that. Then my first challenge of the reel assembly is getting those silly little small screws back in. See if I can't load it on my screwdriver here and make that work. Alright, now don't tighten that all the way down if you didn't put the second one in. You tighten it all the way down and put the second one after that, you're in trouble because you'll face alignment problems. So let's get it centered first. Alright, there we go. That will hold that. That spins nice and freely now. Okay, back up to this assembly then. So here's your anti-reverse ratchet. Now this sits over the pinion gear. I made a mental note, but you should as well, which way those were facing. Now these are tight enough, but if you needed to tighten them, you could grab a little needle nose pliers or something. Just put some gentle pressure on it like that to bring them in. But this one should be operating just fine. And then that sits this way. Then we're back for that collared screw. This one you got to work on because it's got a high-low. It's easy to get it into the screw position to start, but then you have to make sure you're into the bigger hole for the anti-reverse dog. So just work on that, tighten it down. Now you can turn the gear, and you'll see that it's operating the way it should. And that's a friction anti-reverse dog. Okay, that sets that up. Let's go back now and we're going to rebuild the reel again. You've got plastic bushings on the side. That's fine. We got a little bit in the channel here that I notice is dry. And that could have stopped it from going all the way to the top and caused a little bit more of a problem there in terms of performance. So let's get that out of the way. Now if this case had a whole bunch of dried grease all over it, you could do what we did on the rest of the main gear in that. You could hit it with some penetrating oil and soften it all up and go in there. Just a lot of effort there to get all it clean because like the Beatles song said, a clean machine, it really does make a difference. Okay, now I see that we've got some tarnish there. I'm just going to use this to see if I can't get that off. And I can. This is 4-0 steel wool. I wouldn't go any more aggressive than 4-0 steel wool. You don't want to leave scratches in that can embed themselves in there and cause problems later. And there is still some dried grease on there. So that's the problem with this reel, and that's the problem with a lot of reels that you're going to find at flea markets and garage sales and the like. Typically it's a reel that was a well-made reel like this one was, and somebody's probably given up fishing and let it sit before they decided that finally that they're just not going to do it any longer, maybe either because they lost interest in it or because physically they can't do it any longer. And so that usually sits in a hot spot like a garage or an attic or someplace for a while, and that's probably has happened here. And then the reel just seizes, or at least at a minimum slows down. So there you go, look at this now, look at the difference there. So I have no doubt that it was just a combination of the dried grease and the lack of it. Alright, so next up then we're going to put this assembly back. Now most of the time we have problems here because these things could go both ways, and I've seen people install them incorrectly, but in this case the axle shaft can only come in through the top, it doesn't come through, and then you just need front and back. Well, front and back, you remember you took the screw out of the front of this. The back, you can't put that screw in. So that just sits like this into the assembly. There's a channel there where that pin rides. Probably want to put a little bit of grease in there. I know we just cleaned the grease out of the other one, so let's go ahead and put a little bit of grease back into that channel there, just so that that pin rides smoothly. And you don't have to worry too much about this one. If you put a little bit more in, the pin will push it out. It'll find its right level, and it's only going to push it to the side case. It's not going to interfere with anything dramatic. At this point, we can put this back in. I know we had the main shaft in before. The heck, I'll just put the main gear back in. Then you can slide the axle shaft in after you put a little bit of coating of grease on there. I like this latex glove. I use it to keep junk off my hands, and here's a perfect example of how it can be used as a tool. Just get that back in there. Then there's a half moon assembly. The axle shaft can only fit in one way, and just make sure that you have it properly oriented as you go to put it back in. And then we have that set screw that goes through the axle and back into the other side of the block. So let's go ahead and put that in. Those of you that watch the videos know this is the time you go get a cup of coffee, because I have trouble with these small screws. That's okay. I accept it. Okay, tighten that down. You don't want to leave that loose because you don't want that screw working its way out. And then you simply align the stud with the small hole, the ring with the large hole. We want to put a little bit of grease, as we did on everything. Put some on the back of this. Put a little bit on the channel there, and it'll work its way around as it does its rotations. You don't have to go crazy with that. That's the proper set there. Next up then, let's take those, you have the shim washers and then the bushing. Let's make sure we can just get that on properly. That went on real easy. We'll give it a spin. What a difference. So Francisco, this is a beautiful reel, and you're going to have it out there fishing again, I'm sure. All right, let's just put the 3 side plate screws, and then we'll go up top and we'll just put a little bit of oil onto that, onto the bail. So this has a through slot and a slot for the Phillips heads that can be used with either screwdriver. You saw me take it out when we got tough with a flat bladed screw. I much prefer, if you have the ability to use a Phillips head on the case screws, I prefer that. And I prefer working by hand. People have asked me, why don't we use a mechanical screwdriver? And I deplore those. With the hand, you can feel if that screw is moving or not. With the mechanical screwdriver, you usually can't. And what usually happens is you'll break that screw off because of the torque that it is having some issues. Francisco asked me to change this around to a right-handed reel, so we're going to do it at this point. I say right-handed, you're cranking with the left. Look at that, huh? What a nice thing. As I'm doing that, I'm hearing some squeakiness going. I put some oil inside the knob. Also put some oil down below here, because the squeaky reel gets the oil, if you will. Put that nut cap back on the other side. Close that up. Now you usually don't need to do much in a bail service. Some folks have asked if you do have a line roller bearing, you can certainly take care of that. I'll put a little bit of oil on here. This is not a bearing here. This is just a solid piece rotor. We can also slip a little oil in behind there. You don't have to go crazy. Just work it back and forth. Make sure everything's fine. We noticed when we took this apart that it was clean. I'm going to do that final turn there to keep this working. What a beautiful reel. And this is a 35, 40-year-old reel. Look at that. Okay, since it is 35, 40 years old, we'll go over and do the drags just to complete the process. These should be Teflon drags and no action required, but one never knows. So we pull that clip that rides in the channel, and that's what we have. We have the Teflon. We have a super clean interior. Teflon drags by nature are a petroleum product. They don't need to have any kind of lubrication on them. When you're reinstalling these, if you lay them out on the table, there's an eared washer that always goes in the middle. There's three metal washers. You have two round ones and one that's keyed or eared. That goes in the middle. This stack is fine, no action needed. And then we just find the groove for this clip. Make sure that it snaps in all around. Put that clip back onto the reel. Oops, you know what? I took one of those washers off there. Always good to have a part straight because it tells you I'm missing that shim washer that goes on top of the click washer there. Click ratchet. Tighten this down. There we go. There we go. Ready to go fishing. Cast it, crank it, flip that bail. Beautiful reel. So Francisco, it's on its way back to you. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please post them and I will be happy to respond. I try to respond to all of them. If you like the video, please do that and subscribe. And tell your fishing buddies about the channel as I'm trying to grow my audience. Again, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.